chapter 3 comes to the fall of mankind. And two main points I want to bring out in this. You know, we often hear that the first murder happened in Genesis chapter 4 when Cain killed Abel, but that's not necessarily the case. John 8 verse 44 says that Satan was a murderer from the very beginning of time. That's what he did. And he actually set a plot to destroy and kill Adam and Eve because he knew that one day, after seeing those lights in the firmament being placed there, he knew that there would be a virgin that would rise up, and it would be the seed of that woman, as the story of Virgo tells us. It would be her seed that would crush the heel of the serpent. And so Satan always had issues with mankind. And when you look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, look at what God is saying. God is speaking this. This ain't someone else. This is God saying. God says, I will put enmity or bitterness, rivalry between thee, the serpent, and the woman, and between thy seed and between her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. In that prophecy, so Satan has always hated mankind. And I love that when Satan made a move against mankind in Genesis chapter 3 to bring about the fall and the corruption of the lineage, what happened? God said, I'm going to put everlasting bitterness between the two of us. I'm going to establish that. We see God is in perfect control. This is a war. Satan didn't start this war. God started this war because of the devil's behavior. And that's why it's so important that you align yourself with Christ and don't align yourself with the things of this world. Don't bear the manifestations of the flesh or anything, because God's going to win. It's his creation, and he's going to stop at nothing to redeem it. And he has, even to the point of giving his own life for that. So that's something we have to remember and keep track of. And I love this. This is one of the earliest, in my opinion, one of the earliest pictures of where Jesus Christ shows up in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 3, we see where Adam and Eve leave the garden, and look at what it says in verse 24. So he drove out man, meaning man and his wife, and he placed in the east of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way from the tree of life. This is something I've never heard anyone teach on, but I'm going to give you my interpretation of it. This is a Micheal belief. If you want to, you can believe it. You don't have to. I would encourage you, though, to search it out and come to your own conclusion on this. There's not two cherubim and they each have a sword. This is two cherubim and a flaming sword. It's one sword. That's what we have here. The Bible refers to the word of God in Ephesians as a sword, a double-edged sword. John chapter 1 associates the word as being the eternal state of who Jesus Christ is. And we know the Shekinah glory would shine all over Christ in his original state, and even our original state, according to Psalm chapter 8. And I believe that this flaming sword is a manifestation, if you will, of Christ, because where would Christ be? If you have two cherubim, he would be between the cherub, and cherubim stand in the presence of God. You can find that all throughout the Bible. And I think this flaming sword is a personification of a pre-incarnate Christ in the world, and he is he's turning mankind back from the garden so they will not touch the tree of life, and that they would live forever in a fallen, broken state. And again, I think this is a beautiful picture of how God is trying to protect and serve his people. Let's go into chapter 4 real quick of Genesis. Here we have the story of Cain and Abel. And Cain, Cain and Abel, they grew up. It's believed that they were twins because Adam knew his wife intimately, and she conceived and bore Cain, and she also had gotten another brother named Abel. And if you notice the text, it says he knew her once. Basically, he knew her and she conceived twice. Well, the only way to know a woman once and conceive twice with her is if there's twins in her womb. And I really believe that's what's happening. And I think that's a beautiful picture, because so many times you'll see two seeds that are twins or they're very similar in each other, and they actually appear. If you do a study of the bloodline of where the Antichrist is going to come from, then you can see that Christ is going to come from Jacob, and his twin brother Esau is probably going to be where the lineage of the Antichrist comes from. And Jacob and Esau, again, they were twins. I find that very interesting and provocative. Now, as you study, Cain and Abel, they were making sacrifices, and Cain's fell, and Abel was accepted, and you have this rivalry where Cain rose up and he slew Abel, and he was cast out as a vagabond. And we have the lineage of Cain in chapter 4, starting in verse 17, where he had Enoch and so forth. And when you get down to verse 20, you'll find that he had a son named Jabal. He was the father of all live and dwell in tents and have cattle. The word tent there is a religious shrine that is permanently fixed, and it's also associated with the tabernacle of Moses, and it's a place used for worship. So we see at the rise of civilization, we see religious cults that are actually beginning to get formed. His brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all that have harp, all that handled the harp and the organ. They were musicians. And then you have Tubal-Cain, which was his half brother, and he was an instructor of iron and brass. And the Hebrew says, the English says sister of Tubal-Cain was Nimah, but the Hebrew word is actually half sister, and it's the same word that's found in Genesis chapter 20, verse 2, when Abraham tells, I believe it's Abimelech, says, she is my sister, but we have a different father. We have the same father, but we have different mothers. We got the same father, but different mothers. I find that very interesting that you have that. Now, let's see where we are. Now, if you go into chapter 5, you have a whole lineage of names. I want to break that down here for a minute, but you have one man whose name is Jared. His name means to arrive or to descend, and it's believed that in his day, it's that what we have happened is that the fallen angels or the watchers, they descended. Now, they probably weren't fallen when they got here. There's a lot of history that you can get into there, and in the upcoming weeks, we're going to look at the pre-flood world and do an hour study just on that. But they probably descended in this day, and his son's name was Enoch, and it means that to teach or to educate. And Enoch actually had a personal revival in his life to where he began to walk with God after his son Methuselah was born, and Methuselah was basically a living epistle, if you will. And he had a son named Noah, and he was the one that built the ark. Now look at this. I want to share something with you. I think you're going to find this very interesting. Genesis chapter 5, you have 10 men in the Bible. You got Adam, Seth, Enos, Cain, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. And the names mean something. Adam means man, Seth means appointed, Enos means mortal, Canaan means sorrows, Mahalalel means the blessed God, and Jared means to descend or come down. Enoch means to teach or teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring or initiate. Lamech means to despair or be in great mourning. And Noah means to be in rest or have comfort. And when you take the definition of those names and string them out in a sentence that says, man is appointed mortal sorrows, but the blessed God shall come down or descend, teaching that his death shall bring to the strain rest and comfort. And you have that. That brings us now to chapter 6, where we have the days of Noah. And there's about, let's say 4 or 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 things that we need to remember about the days of Noah. It says all the thoughts of, all the imagination of the thoughts of his heart was continually wicked. That was going on in the days of Noah. All flesh was corrupt. It was filled with violence. And that word in Hebrew actually means Hamas. The world was full of Hamas. That's what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24 when he said the days of Noah was going to be like it was when he returns. We also know that God was grieved, and there was also Noah found grace in the eyes of God. So we know that grace was there. We know that grace was being poured out at the time just for the flood. And then we have the time of the flood, where God sent the flood to wipe out everything and start everything anew. And you can go into all the detail with the fountains breaking open in Genesis chapter 7 and 8. And you come to 9 and you have a Noahic covenant. And what I want to point out about this Noahic covenant is that if you look, where's my glasses? There they are. Let me see if I can't find this. Okay. Genesis chapter 9, verse 8 says this, and God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him. Now think about this. God is making a covenant, not just with Noah. We think that the Noah covenant was all about Noah, but God's making a covenant with Noah and his sons with him, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they would later go on to populate the European continent, the African continent, and the Asiatic nation and continent in the Middle East. These are the forerunners of everybody on the face of the earth, all tongues, tribes, nations, and empires. And God is making a covenant with all these people. And what does he say? Behold, I will establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, meaning everybody that comes out, everybody that comes after Noah, God is making this covenant with. Verse 10, and to every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, of the beasts of the earth, with you from all that go out of the ark, into every beast of the earth. And he said, I will establish my covenant with you. Never shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall there be any more a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for a perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring forth the cloud over the earth that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. Now think about this. This is where God is saying that he's going to send the rainbow as a covenant that's going to be a reminder to everybody that will never again be a global flood to destroy all life. And this is what God is telling Noah and his sons. This is a very beautiful, perfect picture of what we have here. We also, in this chapter with Noah's sin, getting drunk, and Ham going in and uncovering his father's nakedness, and there's many speculation into that. I'm going to wait for a later time to get more in detail with this because there's so many theories that we can get into and talk about it. But what I want us to remember is that Japheth and Shem were dealt righteously with their father who had passed out and drunk, and they walked him backwards and covered his nakedness. And this actually caused Ham to bring a curse to his family, in particular his son Canaan, who was supposed to be settled down to the African continent. And people say this is where black people came from. That's hogwash. Canaan is not black. Ethiopians, the Cushites, they were black, not the Canaans. And the Canaanites, they didn't settle in Africa. They settled in the Middle East. That's where we get the land of Canaan from. That's where they went into. So, be careful. I don't like it when people take a theory of racism and they apply it to the Bible and they get a Bible verse of racism, because that just gets under my skin. I'm going to be honest with you. I hate that. Conservatives have got enough problems about some ignorant racist preacher saying that God don't like black people and it's in the Bible, because that's simply not true. But anyway, don't even get me started on that. This brings us to Genesis chapter 10 with Noah's family record. And basically what we have the listing of all the future nations that would come out of this. And we're introduced to a man by the name of Nimrod, who became a mighty hunter in the earth. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Iraq, Akkad, and Calneh, and the land of Shinar. Now, Shinar is where the Tower of Babel is, we're about to look into. And I want to bring out two more cities. The city of Babel, which will become known as the Babylonian Empire. And there's a city named Erech, which is closely associated. It probably is the early city of Enoch that Cain built to establish the first city of Enoch, and he named it after his first son that was born, according to the Bible. So that's pretty interesting that Nimrod is digging up these old cities from before the flood, and he's establishing his kingdom upon these fallen natures. Now, this is something I want you to remember. That there's a very big misunderstanding about the Tower of Babel. We've been taught that basically what happened is the man's sin after the flood was they didn't disperse, they didn't go anywhere, and God judged them at the Tower of Babel. I don't think that's a true, an accurate statement, because in Genesis chapter 10, verse 32, listen to what God says. These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Do you know what the next verse says? You got to go to the next chapter, but the next verse says this: and the whole earth was of one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed, the Hebrew word means, or were led from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now notice, what was Shinar? That was one of the capital places of Nimrod. So something happened that led the people back out. They had obviously dispersed, of course. That's what the Bible says. They were all divided among their nations and tribes, and then they were led from the east. Something to the east brought them back. That's what the text actually says in Hebrew. There was belief that there was a war there according to Jewish history, and Nimrod ruled and reigned over the European continents during the war, and he brought everybody back to slavery at this time. And one good thing about this Tower of Babel, there was a wicked man that helped to institute the false religion of the Tower of Babel. People talk about Semiramis, and we're going to get to her in a later podcast, and I'm going to dedicate a lot of time talking about her and her religion. But according to history, if you go to Joshua, you'll find out that Terah and Nahor, they were Abraham's father and brother. They were idolaters, and that's exactly what Jewish history teaches, that Terah was the high priest at the Tower of Babel. So you have a lot of this religious intrigue and political intrigue going on at the Tower of Babel. And guess what the result was this? After all this turmoil and the rise of this corrupt government in the early post-flood settlements, you have the birth of Abraham. And this is a really beautiful story. God calls Abraham at 75. He tells him to get out of the land of his fathers and move forward. After that, there's a famine. He goes down into Egypt, where Sarah's taken captive. God sends plagues on Pharaoh, and then we have Sarah is restored, and Abraham leaves with great wealth. Abraham and Lot, because of all their wealth that they would get in Egypt in their travels, they have to separate because of the wealth. There's just too much. And isn't that great that God can bless you to the point that it can almost become a stumbling block? You have to keep things in check. Abraham wasn't rich because he knew about money. He was rich because God blessed him. And why did God bless him? Because he was a man after God's own heart. He was a faithful man. He served people. He had a servant's heart. And then, after the strife, Abraham tells Lot, "You tell me which way do you want to go? We have to separate. So you tell me which way we want to go." And guess what Lot did? Lot looked down at the plains of Jordan and said, "Hey, look, I want to go down there with Sodom and Gomorrah." And so he went down there, and that got him in trouble. And in Genesis chapter 14, we have the battle of the giants. There's a whole list of giants there, and Abraham had to go rescue Lot up out of that. And then that's where Melchizedek came down to bless Abraham. We have that story, that chapter in Abraham's life, or actually it's Abram's life. In chapter 15, this is where we come to the Abrahamic covenant, where we have that God actually. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. This is where God promises that He's going to call Israel up out of a place that's going to judge them after about 400 years, and this is a place where we have the Abrahamic covenant that is given. And this is Abraham's about like 80 years old, if I remember. And God makes the covenant with him. And in verse 5, it says, when God brings Abraham out of his father's house, he brings him up out of Egypt. He says, now look toward heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. And the word tell means to list or to recount the story of the stars. And Psalm says that the heavens declare the glory of God, or the person of God. What God is telling Abraham at this point is that the stars spell out the message of the Messiah, and that Messiah would come to the lineage of Abraham. And